Louder. Louder. Loud enough? Okay, if I'm quiet, just give me a signal. Hello everyone, my name is Jess. I am an independent cybersecurity consultant. I work mainly on the kind of human side of cybersecurity, so I am not technical. I work very much on the human and the business side, do a lot of awareness raising. I write policies, and I do kind of a bit of media work as well. I'm talking today about the sociology and the psychology of fear, hence the title, How to be an Effective Terrorist, Fear and Loathing in Cybersecurity. I was interested in fear because I think we sort of talk about fear, or we talk about scary things quite a lot. We kind of talk about the threats of cybersecurity, and doing awareness raising, I find that people are often kind of quite scared, quite nervous, and I wondered if there's a way we can not use the fear, so that's partly why I started looking into this. The more I did the sort of reading and the thinking about it, the more I thought, well, we can't really avoid using fear, but maybe there are more effective ways that we can do that, so that we don't just put people off, which is what we seem to do quite a lot. So that's why I kind of decided to explore the sociology and the psychology of fear. So, just checking that the slides are working. So I have had quite an unusual route into this industry. People often find it kind of quite odd that I'm a sociologist working in a very technical field. I think this is a little bit extreme. I don't think I've ever killed off any identities, but I've had a few different kind of roles and worked in a few different areas. So I started out in sociology. My first degree was sociology and politics. I planned to work in politics when I finished. I did some interning and worked with politicians, and very quickly decided that politics probably wasn't actually for me, so I didn't do that. I then worked in regeneration. I worked at the Northwest Development Agency, and I was working in social inclusion and poverty and deprivation, doing research in that. And from there went to do a master's in town and regional planning, and then from that I did a PhD in civic design. Civic design is kind of the combination of sociology and town planning and economics and environmentalism. It's basically how you design society. And I looked at the idea of the knowledge economy, this idea that we now use information so much more, the globalization of information and the internet, and the impact that that's had on societies and institutions and individuals. From there I got headhunted by a cybersecurity startup in London, and I joined there, worked there for a few years, set up a training department there. Worked mainly with kind of FTSE 100 companies and also in the public sector. And I was there for a couple of years and then decided that I wanted to kind of find my own way, so I set up my own company nearly 18 months ago. So that's me, that's how I've ended up in this field. To me it makes perfect sense that I work in cybersecurity, kind of looking at information and how information kind of plays a part in society and how institutions have responded to that, but people often find it a little bit surprising. Anyway, what am I talking about today? I'm talking about what fear actually is, how we can understand what fear is. I'll be covering various different kind of psychological models and borrowing from a bit of psychology and sociology, touching on climate change towards the end, and ending with some recommendations from what I have read and understood. So I've already kind of touched on this, like why I am talking about this subject. As I've said, I think kind of fear and the threat is unavoidable when we're talking about information security. I think in general users, in my experience, are very scared and nervous about technology and about the internet and about being hacked, but they don't feel that they understand it, they don't feel empowered, and it sort of makes them feel a little bit stupid, and so maybe they don't engage with the subject in the way that we would like them to. As someone who has come from a non-technical background, it always amazes me that in this industry there's such a huge amount of knowledge and technical expertise, and yet we aren't bringing users with us. There's such a huge gap, and it seems to be widening between this industry and between the average user. We know that like 11% of people use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as their password or something like that, and people just don't seem to be getting the messages that we're trying to share. So that's why I'm looking at it. Also, being a sociologist and a psychologist, I love theory, I love reading stuff, I love kind of thinking about different theoretical models, so I was involved in that. So I've got a few videos to show today, but we've had some technical issues, so I'm not going to show the first video. I'm just going to show you the funny videos. The first video is a very tiny clip from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and basically it was to kind of just prompt the question of what is fear. So fear is often understood as an emotion, obviously an unpleasant emotion. It's usually been regarded as something that's natural. We naturally are fearful of something, kind of coming from Darwin and the idea of fight or flight. You get adrenaline, you either fight something or you're scared of it and you run away. And it's linked to kind of threat of something uncomfortable happening, being killed, being in pain, somehow coming to harm. It's linked to anxiety, and if we kind of go back to older definitions of fear, it was kind of a combination of dread and reverence, so that's why you get the saying fear of God, kind of this idea of something that you should be scared of but also respectful of. And I kind of wonder if technology comes in there as well. So this is a definition from a sociologist called Tudor. I'll be coming back to Tudor in a little bit. But basically says that fear is not just emotional, it's actually physical and psychological, it's social and it's cultural. This is going back to 2002, and I wonder if we could add technical to that as well. I think increasingly people are scared of technology, they're scared of where technology is taking us, and they feel that they don't necessarily understand it. So I've said that fear is an emotion, which I think obviously it is, but fear is possibly more than that as well. So if we go back, fear has always been explored by psychologists. It was only about 10 or 15 years ago that sociologists started to look at fear. And Tudor, who I just referenced, is one of the main ones to start looking at fear from a kind of social perspective, and actually do we socially construct our fears. And what he said is that we need cognitive maps, so we need to understand that there is a threat before we can be scared of something. And this made me think about information security, because I kind of thought you have to kind of fill in the blanks for people. If people don't understand the full picture, then they don't know what they're scared of or why they should be scared. They just hear us telling them they should be scared. So, I don't know how well you can see the screen, but can anybody tell me, who hasn't seen this presentation before, can anybody tell me what they see on screen? What is that dot to dot? Cat. So cats aren't really very scary, are they? And then of course you start to fill in the blanks, and it's not a cat. Well, it is a cat, it's a very big cat with very big teeth, it's actually a tiger. So what Tudor said is people need cognitive maps. They need to be able to understand that something is scary to be scared of it. Now even when you see that, and you see obviously that particular tiger is not so scary, but say you were walking through a jungle and you came across a big scary tiger, we would know in this room, I think everybody would know probably, to be scared of that tiger. They wouldn't want to be killed by it, but that's because we understand what a tiger is. If you'd never had the cognitive map to tell you that this is a tiger, that can kill you, that has big scary teeth and kind of has a predator instinct, then you might not be scared of it. You might just be curious about this big fluffy cat. So you may go up to the big fluffy cat and get killed. So that's kind of the idea of having a cognitive map, having something explained to you, knowing that you should be scared of something. But likewise, depending on who you are and your background and the context, different people will respond to the tiger in a different way. So if you're just me, I've never had any training with wild beasts, I would not know what to do with a tiger, I'd be quite scared. If I was a hunter though, and I'd had lots of training, and I was being paid to go and kill this lovely animal, and I would have all the equipment, then I would not be so scared. There might be a little bit of adrenaline, But mainly I would just be excited, and I would be pleased that I could put my training into action. I would be thinking, yes, I can kill this tiger and make lots of money, get its skin, whatever. So I wouldn't feel fear in the same way that a layperson would. Likewise, if I was a guide, and again I'd had training, I would be in a group of other guides, there would be a division of labour, a hierarchy, I would know my place, and again I would have the right equipment. Maybe I would have someone with me who had knives or a gun. So again, I wouldn't feel so scared. I would also have a responsibility if I was a guide. I would have other people with me that I would be showing wild animals to. I would be there as almost an interpreter between those individuals and the wild animals. And I sort of, going through this example, I like to think of those of us working in the information security industry as being the guides, kind of the ones that are interpreting, the ones that are taking the users and showing them kind of the threats and showing them the dangers and how to navigate the internet and the threats that are there. So I mentioned that I'll be talking about fear appeals, and I wonder if anyone knows what fear appeals are. Does anyone want to take a guess at what a fear appeal is? You will all know what they are. I thought that was a hand going up, but it was just someone drinking beer, so I can't blame you. I would like to be doing the same. So fear appeals are, you will have all seen them. Fear appeals are what you see on packets of cigarettes, telling you don't smoke these cigarettes because they will kill you. Then what you see on the TV in terms of don't drink and drive, wear your seatbelt. They are persuasive messages that use fear to get you to act or not act in a certain way. So there's been an awful lot of research into fear appeals, and some psychologists called Witt and Allen did a huge review of fear appeals from 1953 up to 2000. So they looked at over 100 psychological articles and kind of summarised what works and what doesn't in terms of appealing to people's fear to get them to change their behaviour. They found that there's three variables in fear appeals. They will kind of try and capitalise on people's fear, obviously, which is largely an emotion, expressed as an emotion, although not wholly, as I've said. They will also engage with threat, which is a cognition, that's us understanding what the tiger is, to be scared of it and feel the emotion of fear. And they will also engage with efficacy. So efficacy is the ability to produce a desired result. So kind of control, and the extent to which you are able to do something to achieve something. And efficacy is made of two parts. So there's self-efficacy, which is the extent to which I think that I can have an action that will have a result. And then there's response efficacy. So the extent to which I think that action will actually work. So in terms of smoking, do I think that I can quit smoking? That's one part. Do I think that quitting smoking will stop me getting lung cancer? So you have to convince people of both to make them act. Going on from this research, one of those psychologists, Witt, came up with a model that tried to really unpick when do fear appeals work and when do they not. And Witt used some research by a psychologist called Leventhal, who I'll come back to in a second, who I'm very keen on, and Witt came up with this model that basically said there are different stages to our response to fear appeals, and your brain kind of goes through these subconscious responses very quickly without you really being conscious of it. So firstly what you do is you appraise the threat. So you have a look at the threat, you think, is it severe? Does it look, yes, is lung cancer bad? Do I not want lung cancer? Am I susceptible to it? Well, yes, I'm a smoker, so I am actually not a smoker. I don't know why I'm obsessing on smoking, sorry for all you smokers. But am I susceptible to it? Am I likely to suffer from that threat? The more severe that somebody thinks a threat is, and the more they feel susceptible to it, the more motivated they will be to appraise the efficacy. So the more likely they will be to appraise the response that is being suggested to see if they should engage with it or not. In looking at the efficacy, they will say, am I able to do that? And does it look like it's going to work? So when people look at cybersecurity messages, they say, how severe is that threat? So what is the danger of, what's the outcome, the negative outcome of my emails being hacked? How likely is it that my email account is going to get hacked? What can I do to stop it happening? Can I have a million different complicated passwords and remember them all? And is that actually going to work? So they kind of go through all of those different stages in their head. And depending very much on the efficacy, depending on the extent to which they think they are able to engage with the solution we're offering, and the extent to which they think that solution will actually work, will they go on to either control the danger or the fear. So if they think that the solution won't work and it's not within their control anyway, there's no way they're going to remember a million different passwords, then what they will do is they will either go into denial, or they will go into avoidance, or they will go into reactance. So they will have a fear control response. They will respond to the fear, and depending on whether they think they are able to control the danger or not, depending on whether they think they can respond in the way that we're suggesting and that response will actually protect them, they will either think, yeah, I can do that, and I will do that, and they'll be motivated to do it, or they will think, it's not going to happen to me, why would anybody want to hack my emails, why would anybody be bothered with attacking my company, why would anybody want our data, or they will go into avoidance, they will ignore it, they will decide they've got other more important things to worry about, or reactance. And reactance is, they're just trying to manipulate me, this person is just trying to sell to me, I don't understand what they're selling, I don't understand the solution that they're offering, I don't think it's going to work anyway, so I'm not going to bother. Now I am going to show you this video, if you bear with me. I told you I wasn't technical, it still isn't my fault that this didn't fail. Can you hear?
This handcrafted mahogany wood model B-25 Mitchell Panchito aircraft. Don't say. And I went to this website and this ad popped up that said, "Hey, Ron Swanson, check out this great offer."
What's your question?
My question is, what the hell?
Like, how do they know who you are?
Yeah.
Okay. There are these things called cookies, where like if you go to a site and buy something, it will remember you and then create ads for other stuff you might want to buy.
So to learn this information about me seems like an invasion of privacy.
Dude, if you think that's bad, go to Google and type in your address.
So I'm almost tempted to leave it playing, but I won't tempt fate by trying to show any more about the video. So, who watches Parks and Rec? Does anybody? Yeah, good few hands. And can anybody tell me what the worst thing about that was? Yes, him binning his computer. Why was that the worst thing? Yes, brilliant. It's so rare that anybody actually, thank you, yes, exactly. So fear made him go into denial, reactance, avoidance, and instead of doing what he needed to do, he did the absolute worst thing possible and made his data more insecure. And I think users are probably doing that every day. So I showed you that video because A, it's funny, B, I love Ron Swanson, and C, I wanted to make that point. For those of you who don't watch Parks and Recreation, a little quick introduction to Ron Swanson. He loves breakfast food, particularly bacon. He stores all his money in gold, wherever possible, and he very much enjoys chopping wood. So, in other words, Ron Swanson is obviously a hero, and I like any excuse to shoehorn him into a presentation. I'm further shoehorning him by asking, does it matter who Ron Swanson is? Ron Swanson is obviously not the kind of man who gets particularly anxious. And I would say he responds probably to anxiety like that. He kind of just says, no, forget about it, I'm not going to be bothered about that. So does that matter in terms of trying to engage with fear and getting Ron to be more secure with his information? Well, actually, the research on fear control responses and on fear appeals suggests that the extent to which somebody is anxious or not naturally makes no difference when you're trying to appeal to their fear. Everybody responds in that same way that I described in terms of that model. So actually, your anxiety level doesn't really make a difference. So whether you are Ron Swanson and you don't particularly get anxious, or whether you're Leslie Lope and you get particularly anxious, doesn't really make a difference, which I think is quite helpful in terms of kind of awareness raising. Where differences in personality do come in, to some extent, is in the theory of planned behaviour. The theory of planned behaviour is all about sorry, I'm being played by a fly. The theory of planned behaviour is all about the link between beliefs and behaviours. So all about the way that people understand something to be true, and then that influences how they actually behave. And it's made up of three main facets. Kind of argues that humans are governed by their attributes, and the extent to which they understand something to be favourable, whether they believe and evaluate something to be a good thing to do or not, that will influence their behaviour. Social norms are hugely important, and particularly the extent to which significant individuals condone an act or not. And I think this one is particularly important in information security. I found it myself when I'm kind of doing awareness raising in an organisation, or when I'm actually kind of putting in any kind of new information security messages, or when I'm putting in new policies. I found that who is kind of governing information is really important, and who is driving the messages really matters. So if I've been brought in by the board level, and particularly the financial director, and the organisation can see that the man or woman with the money is really behind the programme, then I find that it is generally more successful and people engage with it much more, because people understand that money is important in the organisation they work for, and so if the person with the money is shelling out for it and is spending time and attention on it, then that will encourage everybody in the organisation to think, okay, this is quite important, I'm going to pay a bit more attention. Context also matters. So if it's a work-related thing, having people at work leading is important. If it's a home thing, having people at home leading is more important. So you kind of judge individuals depending on their context. And finally, kind of sense of control, perceived behavioural control. So the extent to which individuals see themselves as being capable of actually changing their behaviour, the extent to which they think they're skillful enough, and that they understand, and that they kind of have the time and everything. So that's the efficacy part again. And also, sense of control is governed by external factors. Do they have the support network? And are they able, in kind of an external sense, to be able to change their behaviour? And depending on the combination of those three things, intentions become actions. Of course, intentions don't always translate into actions, and there can be a diversion between what we want to do and what we actually do. And that depends on those three things, but it also depends on whether you understand what you're supposed to be doing. So I think this again goes back to kind of joining up the dots for people. If people don't fully understand how to keep their information safe, if they don't fully understand what a secure password is, then they may seek to be more secure online, but they won't know how to actually do it. I mentioned very briefly social norms in terms of significant individuals, but social norms also kind of come in another way. Social norms can be split into two different classes, and they are descriptive and injunctive. A descriptive norm is, as you would expect, it's kind of a description of something. And an injunctive norm is a signal or a symbol or a picture or a standard. It's a different way of expressing it. So I like to think about this in terms of passwords. A descriptive norm is saying to someone, kind of having your mother's maiden name as a password is not very secure. You should not do that. You should use a minimum of 9 characters, and they should be a mixture of letters and numbers and upper and lowercase and yada yada yada. That's a descriptive norm. An injunctive norm is when you put a password into a website and that bar comes up with the strength indicator and giving you a different colour from low to strong. And research suggests, I'm using research from Schultz and Nolan here, and it's particularly focusing on climate change. Research suggests that people respond to injunctive norms, so they respond to pictures and symbols and signals much more than they respond to descriptions. So this research by Schultz and Nolan was looking at climate change and energy use. It looked at a particular neighbourhood over a long period of time, and it monitored energy use. And to some people in the neighbourhood, it sent out descriptions of you are using less energy than your neighbours, or you are using more energy than your neighbours. And to out smiley faces and frowny faces, depending on whether they were using less or more. Obviously, if they were using less, they got the smiley face. If they were using more, they got the frowny face. And what they found was that the people getting the descriptions, so the people that were getting the descriptive norms, they appropriated the norm. So if they got a letter saying you are using less energy than your neighbour, they thought, fantastic, I can start turning up the heating a little bit and leaving the lights on a little bit more because Bob next door is using more energy than me. But when people got the injunctive norms, when they got the smiley faces or the frowny faces, they wanted to either keep their smiley face, or if they'd got a frowny face and they found out that Bob next door had got a smiley face, they wanted a smiley face. So Schultz and Nolan, they did this over a long period of time in the same neighbourhood and found that injunctive norms are more powerful. I've mentioned climate change because I think it is a very similar problem. It's something that is understood to be in general, to be real, and it's a big problem affecting society that people work very hard to try to prevent and control, but behaviours aren't really changing. And when you look at the reasons why behaviours aren't changing in terms of climate change, it's very similar to why they aren't changing in this area as well. People are uncertain of the exact nature of the problem. They think it's kind of this big problem that feels quite intangible and they don't understand all the small parts of it. People don't really trust the messages that they receive. Everybody's comparing themselves to Bob next door and thinking, well, Bob next door's got rubbish passwords, so, you know, why should I change mine? You know, they'll just hack Bob, they won't hack me. Undervaluing risks, so not really appreciating the risk. Not feeling in control, feeling it's this big problem that is bigger than you, that you don't really understand how to make sense of. Not feeling able to control it, so not really understanding or not feeling able that you can have a million different passwords or habits. Just not being in the habit of recycling, not being in the habit of really worrying about where your data goes and who you should be sharing it with and how you should be sharing it. Also, throughout kind of the research of psychology of climate change, what researchers have found is that if people are told, for example, climate change is going to be a huge problem in 25 years, what individuals hear is, you've got 25 years, yes, carry on. Finally, I just want to touch on the idea of empowerment. So I think when you talk about fear, empowerment is kind of the opposite of fear. Too often I think fear is undermining and it just makes people nervous and it makes sort of them feel out of control. Whereas empowerment is all about encouraging people to gain mastery and feel in control and feel able to take charge of an issue. So this is a sociologist called Rappaport who did a lot of research into the idea and the notion of empowerment. And a lot of psychologists and sociologists look at this in terms of public health. You know, how can we tell people to engage with prevention, for example, in terms of STDs? How can we do that, but in an empowering way? So how can we say, don't do this, don't do that, but in a way that will be more empowering and encouraging? So basically, how can you combine prevention and empowerment? And I think that really ties into information security, is kind of how you can express a negative message, but in a way that encourages people to kind of be positive and engage with it. And one thing that comes out of this research is that kind of giving people a role makes a huge difference. So this is a piece of research that looked at mental health, and I think it was mental health and alcohol abuse. And it looked at a particular kind of service where they put in a spectrum of empowerment. So they had some people who just went as users, some people who went and took on a kind of informal role looking after small teams, some people who had a formal role, so they were kind of given shifts and times to go and times to lead in the service, and then some people who were leadership and who kind of chaired the organisation and decided how it was going to run and made decisions. And what the research found, of course, was that the more people were engaged, the more of a role they had, the more they felt responsible for other people, the more they were empowered and the more they changed their own behaviour. So again, I think about this very much when I am looking at training or governance in an organisation, is how you can get everybody to feel that they have a role, that they are responsible for other people, and therefore that they are empowered to engage and to change their own behaviours as well as lead others. So, in terms of recommendations, empower as well as prevent, so I've just been through. Communication makes a huge difference, so I've not really talked about language that much, but I think language is hugely important. I just mentioned users before, and I think users can be a very negative word to use. It's, you know, people have said before that information security and drug abuse are the two places where people will use the term user. So if someone's got a better term, that would be great. But also, in terms of communication, the kind of the idea around injunctive norms and using symbols and pictures and engaging people in a different way. I think that also ties into immediate feedback and people feeling that they get that kind of instant gratification. Making people understand that information security messages are serious and likely, so going back to the idea of the extended parallel process model, that model that I showed. If you're using fear in any way to try and engage with people, maybe in terms of awareness raising or even in terms of selling them information security products or services, then backing up any fear messages with efficacy, so making them understand why the solution works and how they have the ability to engage with it. And very importantly, assessing and evaluating. So if you have to make sure that you understand the outcomes that you're getting, because otherwise it may just make the problem worse. It may make people go into denial or avoidance or reactance, people just putting their head in the sand. And fear appeals can also kind of make people feel confused, they can make them feel puzzled, and they can actually sort of downgrade efficacy and make people feel more out of control. So again, I have to come out and do this to just show a very quick clip on why okay, I'm just showing you everything right now just to why fear doesn't work.
It just show you it, saying, oh, I don't know, the internet, I think it works. The world, as we know it, will fall into chaos. Planets will drop from the sky into tears. Society will tear itself apart like an angry child with that kid. Man with quite evil instinct to survive at any cost would lead to terrible violence, and that's what the flashing light is for. Is it heavy? That's a bit of a silly question, the internet in a way.
so very funny. But also just a bit of an illustration as to why fear, uncertainty and doubt doesn't tend to work unless it's presented in the right way. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. Please find me on the internet, come and say hello after this, say hello on Twitter, whatever. But yeah, thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much, EMF Camp. And if anybody has any questions or comments, I would love to hear them. Any questions? No? Oh, yep. Hiya.
You said at the beginning that fear is based on an emergent response, whereas I would see it as what something fear is based on unreactive response. Would you say fear is sometimes based on non-knowing?
Yeah, I think it's fear a mix of what you know and what you don't know. So, like when you come and give a presentation, coming to give this presentation today. Before I came yesterday, so I like public speaking in general. Before I came yesterday, it was like, okay, so I have no idea what the venue is like. I don't know how big the stage is, but I know that getting up on stage can be a bit nerve-wracking. I know that the videos often go wrong. You know what I mean? I know that I could be challenged. I know that I could totally forget everything that I've got to say. So I sort of half know. And then I don't know quite what it's going to be like. I don't quite know what this circumstance is going to be like, so that makes it a bit more scary. And then I came last night and I looked this morning and it was like, okay, so there's the room and there's the setup, and then I'll try and see if I can get the videos to play, and then I can't find out if the videos are going to play, and so then I get more nervous. So I think it's kind of a mix. I think if you had no idea what a tiger was and you saw it, it's really hard to know, isn't it? I think it can engage, as that example sort of said, you can engage with your curiosity, where you can just want to find out more, or it can engage with your kind of natural kind of fear instinct. So I would say it's basically a mix of the two. I think in terms of information security, people not knowing and not understanding does make them more scared, but in that negative way, where they are more likely to go into denial or avoidance of it's not going to happen to us, or we'll only worry about getting hacked once we've been hacked, or you know, this person's just trying to sell their products to me, so I'm not going to buy them. And so I think if we can get people to understand the threat a bit more and what they can do about it at the same time, then that would elicit a kind of greater engagement. And that's what I was trying to say. Thank you. It's a great question. Hiya.
One of the things that was implicit in your talk and didn't seem to come out much was that fear itself seems to be one of the main tools in terms of managing it. So, for example, when you were talking about driving security policies in organisations, presumably behind the idea that it's someone senior behind is oh dear, they're looking over my shoulder, I could lose my job. In other words, it's translating a fear that you either don't understand or don't care about into one that you do understand, do care about.
So, are you talking about kind of carrot or stick there? Is that what you mean? So kind of in terms of engaging people in an organisation, or?
Yeah, yes, and very much the stick element.
Yeah. I do think you need a bit of both in organisations. I think, yeah, people need to know that they're being monitored and that, like you say, having the kind of deltas in place. But I think if it's just the stick, then I think that's too negative. And so I've seen it in organisations before that if you just purely have a culture of fear, then people will hide stuff. So people won't report, you know, when they lose files on a train or whatever, because they know that they'll just get the finger pointed at them and they'll just get blamed. And so why would they? They may lose their job. So I think it's better to combine kind of fear and kind of positive, and that's why I talk about empowerment. So one organisation, I use this example a lot, but one organisation I've worked with, when it's reporting incidents, they will, obviously they don't want people to lose data, but they understand that people do. So the first time that somebody loses, for example, papers on a train, they will then give them specific training on what information they can and can't be taking out of the office in paper format and how they should be doing it. If they lose their BlackBerry, then they will give them information on, you know, how they should be securing their BlackBerry, whatever. So they will focus the training on the incident. And so they will try and empower the individual and try and say, okay, so you obviously didn't understand what you should or shouldn't be doing. So we're going to give you this training. We're going to support you to understand how to look after your information more and why you should. And then hopefully you won't do it again. If they do it again, then they'll use fear. So I quite like that response.
You mentioned assessing the result of your prevention policies. Sorry. You mentioned assessing the result of your prevention policies. Now, I understand how that could be done at an organisational level because you can just have training. But in terms of public planning or crime prevention generally, do you have any practical ideas how you could assess what sort of impact your messages are having on people? Because I can understand how you do it in a business, but if you're doing it to a city or to a whole street, I don't see how you can practically check whether that's having any sort of impact.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I've not really thought about it on that level before, to be honest. And I think it's tricky because, like you see in an organisation, you put in a cultural change program and awareness raising and all of this sort of thing, and then you see incidents go up because people are reporting them more. And I think, you know, one of the reasons we see attacks on organisations going up is because organisations are finding out that they're being attacked, whereas in the past they just didn't know about it. So I think it's really difficult. But one thing is kind of just engaging with people's behaviour. So if it was a street, for example, what I would do is I would be kind of sending out questionnaires and surveys and kind of asking people how they are behaving. And so I would be asking them kind of basic questions about how they understand the messages, and if it was, say, focusing on passwords, then okay, what passwords are you using and why, and that sort of thing. And I've done research like that before, just with the average users, not at all connected to organisations, that kind of looks at attitudes and behaviours and tries to work out what is that link with attitudes and behaviours and what is it actually like out there. Like how scared are people of cyber insecurity, and to what extent are they behaving in a secure way. And so I would try and do it in that asking people way, rather than, I think it's quite, as you say, quite a tricky thing to monitor at a city or neighbourhood level. If you have any, it would be good to have a chat. Yeah, thank you. Hi.
Being a sociologist and psychologist, how do you feel about working in such a technical field? Because they're really different from like sociologists and psychologists to computing and technology, really.
Yeah, I wish there were more people who kind of had the social focus. I sometimes feel like a bit, I don't know, a bit of an anomaly. People are often very surprised by my background. But when I sort of said that I was headhunted for the original role I took in this industry, and that was by someone who was setting up a cybersecurity firm. He had all of the technical skill that he needed in terms of his employees, but he didn't have anyone that he felt could kind of bridge both and kind of be almost a bit of an interpreter. And so that's why he hired me. He hired me because he wanted someone that could bring a social and a business angle to the subject. And he felt that that the industry sort of needs maybe a more diverse pool of people working in it. I am constantly trying to improve my technical knowledge. It's a challenge, but I think someone having both is ideal. But I also think we can have people who are really technical and people who, like me, focus more on the social side. And really, because the problem is the interaction between humans and technology, of course, then I think you need both parts. So I hope that I bring a different perspective that is sort of interesting. And I love the field. I think because it's challenging, that's partly why I love it, because I'm always learning something new, and I always know there's a lot for me to learn. Thank you. Any more? Hi.
You said you briefly dabbled in politics. What do you think of the sort of standard Home Office fear, uncertainty and doubt for horsemen of the apocalypse, terrorists, hackers, paedophiles, drug dealers, evil, we need to snoop on all your data because.
Yeah, I did leave politics behind for a reason, and I don't want to get too political. But I think in terms of this subject, mixing messages can be a dangerous thing. So you mentioned kind of paedophilia, and one thing that I find particularly worrying is when the government will talk about needing to kind of track and monitor and stamp out paedophiles who operate through the internet and who use the internet to exchange sexually abusive images of children and to arrange, this international network that does exist of paedophilia, when they confuse that with online pornography, for example, and teenagers accessing online porn. And I think we saw that quite a lot last summer, where the government would kind of play on the paedophile angle to try and control and stamp down on access to pornography. And I sort of think when the government mix messages, and probably it's a mixture of them not really understanding, and also the cynic in me wonders if they do it to some extent on purpose. I think that's an unfortunate thing, because I think it makes people more scared without understanding why. And I wish there was more focus on clear messages as to what the threats are, what the realistic threats are, and what we should be doing about them. No, sorry. Yeah.
I'm sure there's lots of people in the audience here who are really convinced that the NSA and GCHQ care about them enough to bother to intercept their emails, and they must take all of the most paranoid technical techniques against all that. But isn't that where kind of people overestimate the risk because of these fear messages?
I don't know. Maybe there's a mixture of people overestimating and underestimating. I don't know. One thing that I found really interesting, I happened to be in Washington when Snowden's story broke. And over there it was huge news. And then I came back to England and it really wasn't at all. So it's kind of interesting to see different cultures respond in different ways. And the political system of America probably made a huge difference as to why people out there responded in a much more surprised and enraged way than I think people here did.
Cool,
I think people may be coming in for the next talk. I'm in danger of having gone on a little bit too long. If anyone has any other questions, I'd love to have a chat afterwards, but otherwise, thank you all very much for being such a nice audience. Thank you.